By the summer of 1945, Nazi Germany had surrendered, but the Pacific War remained trapped in a brutal stalemate. The battles for islands like Iwo Jima and Okinawa resulted in near-total casualty rates for Japanese defenders and pushed American losses to all-time highs. To break this deadlock without putting boots on the ground, the U.S. Army Air Forces turned to relentless, low-level incendiary bombing. Led by General Curtis LeMay, these conventional air raids systematically incinerated 64 Japanese cities. A single night of firebombing in Tokyo killed an estimated 100,000 people and left 250,000 buildings in ashes. This chart compares the actual historical casualties of the Pacific War to the projections for Operation Downfall, the planned Allied invasion of the Japanese mainland.
Because Japan had mobilized an all-out civilian defense, U.S. strategists calculated that forcing a surrender on the ground would cost hundreds of thousands of American lives and leave between 5 and 10 million Japanese dead. Then, in July 1945, the Manhattan Project successfully detonated the first atomic device in the New Mexico desert. The theoretical physics had worked. The military now possessed a single explosive device equivalent to thousands of tons of TNT. For the military leadership, deploying this new atomic weapon was not viewed as crossing a new moral threshold. After months of burning entire cities with conventional incendiaries, the atomic bomb was simply the logical, mathematical solution to avoid a massive land invasion. Looking at this tactical map, we can see the strict criteria established by the military's target committee. To accurately assess the weapon's destructive capability, they needed cities with a diameter of at least 3 miles, containing significant military or industrial value that had been deliberately left untouched by previous firebombing raids. Hiroshima fit the profile perfectly. It housed the headquarters of the 2nd General Army and served as a major logistics base. More importantly, it was surrounded by adjacent hills. The committee calculated that these hills would physically bounce the blast wave back over the city, compounding the destructive force. Kyoto was originally high on the list, but U.S. Secretary of War Henry Stimson successfully lobbied to cross it off over the city's historical and cultural significance. To replace it, the committee added Nagasaki, a major seaport responsible for producing Japanese naval ordnance. Military planners used these cities as pristine laboratories to measure the psychological shock of the weapon's power, aiming to force a surrender through a sudden, overwhelming display of force. The delivery system for this new weapon was highly specialized. On the island of Tinian, the 509th Composite Group operated modified Silverplate B-29 bombers, stripped of excess weight and equipped with reversible pitch propellers and pneumatic bomb bay doors to ensure a clean, precise drop. The enriched uranium bomb, codenamed Little Boy, was so volatile that the crew feared a crash during takeoff could trigger an accidental explosion. To bypass this risk, Navy Captain William Parsons climbed into the bomb bay to arm the device mid-flight, carefully inserting the explosive powder charge by hand while cruising over the Pacific. The logistics of the second drop, 3 days later, relied heavily on chance. The bomber boxcar took off with a broken fuel transfer pump, trapping 640 gallons of fuel in a reserve tank. When they arrived over their primary target of Kokura, dense cloud cover and smoke obscured the aiming point, forcing a desperate pivot to the secondary target, Nagasaki. Released from 31,000 feet, the detonation went exactly as planned. From the cockpit, the crew's experience of the weapon was entirely mechanical. They witnessed a blinding flash of light and felt a severe shockwave that the pilots compared to a close burst of anti-aircraft fire. This is the reality of modern aerial warfare. The crews were thousands of feet in the air and miles away before the bomb even detonated. They executed a checklist, recorded the data, and flew back to base. On the ground, the clinical math disappeared. At 8:15 a.m. in Hiroshima, civilians experienced what they called the peak of dawn, a brilliant, silent flash of magnesium white light, immediately followed by a deafening, crushing sonic boom. The physics were instantaneous. Directly beneath the detonation, temperatures spiked to 10,000 degrees. The outward pressure wave crushed timber-framed homes into splinters across an 11 square mile radius. Within minutes, the thousands of small, scattered fires ignited by the thermal flash merged into a massive, self-sustaining firestorm. The capacity to treat the wounded evaporated instantly. Because the blast hit the city center, over 90% of Hiroshima's doctors and nurses were killed or severely injured in a matter of seconds. The hospitals were reduced to rubble, leaving tens of thousands of burn victims with nowhere to go. But the weapon's effects didn't end with the fire. Shortly after the blast, radioactive ash mixed with moisture in the atmosphere, falling as a tar-like black rain. Over the next few weeks, survivors who appeared totally uninjured began to lose their hair, hemorrhage, and die from acute radiation syndrome, a condition where ionized radiation literally breaks down human cellular structure. Beyond the immediate structural demolition, the bomb left behind an invisible, lingering poison that systematically dismantled the human body from within, long after the fires had burned out. On August 9th, just hours before the bomb fell on Nagasaki, Soviet armor poured across the border into Manchuria. Facing the dual realities of absolute urban annihilation from the sky and a massive Soviet land invasion, the Japanese military's political deadlock finally broke. Emperor Hirohito recorded a radio address, the first time a Japanese monarch had ever spoken directly to his subjects, to accept the Allied terms. He specifically cited the new and most cruel bomb as the reason for the end of hostilities. The war was over, but the survivors of the blasts, known as the hibakusha, returned to the radioactive rubble. Because the public did not understand radiation, these survivors faced intense stigma and fear-based discrimination in the job market and in marriage, alongside a lifetime of strict medical monitoring by foreign researchers. While the weapon successfully ended the global conflict, it created a permanent class of victims carrying the physical and genetic scars of nuclear radiation. The American monopoly on atomic weaponry was short-lived. Just 4 years later, in August 1949, the Soviet Union successfully detonated its own atomic bomb, instantly triggering the Cold War arms race. The weapons that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki were soon categorized as small, tactical fission devices. Within a decade, both nations developed thermonuclear hydrogen bombs, capable of yielding explosive energy thousands of times greater than the weapons dropped in 1945. As this map tracks the proliferation of warheads across the globe over the next several decades, global military strategy shifted. Security came to rely on the nuclear umbrella, a fragile international architecture maintained entirely by the promise of mutually assured destruction. Ultimately, Hiroshima and Nagasaki stand as permanent, existential warnings of humanity's capacity to engineer its own extinction.